Imagine you're given two options. In the first, you live an ideal life. You're happy and have everything you've ever wanted, to be a fulfilled human being. The catch, your real body is floating in a tank, hooked up to a machine that will have you live out the rest of your days in an artificial world that you can't tell apart from reality. Or do you continue to brave out your existence in the real world, where there is no guarantee of contentment, fulfillment or success, but whatever experience you have, negative or positive, will be real. While this concept isn't anything new, and has been reimagined in any number of sci-fi titles over the years, this was an idea put forward in 1974 by philosopher Robert Nozick, to be connected up to something called the experience machine. This machine could simulate any experience you wanted, so realistic that you can't tell them apart from real life. The question is, would you choose to get inside? This subject would be difficult to talk about from a modern perspective without bringing up VR and video games in general. These are probably the closest things we have to the conceptual tank, and present entire worlds on a completely different dimension to traditional media. Here we, quite literally in some cases, have whole worlds to explore. But Nozick actually came up with this concept in an attempt to combat the idea of hedonism. The experience machine was made specifically with pleasure and desire in mind, which brings up an interesting deviation. There is a specific kind of person who will have you believe video games are hedonism, that they fulfill the evil desires and sadistic pleasures of their users to be an Eastern European carjacker, or a psychopathic mass shooter, or a cowboy kicking someone to death. To be fair, I do enjoy that last one quite a bit. But to anyone who's actually played games in the last few decades, they realise that this is an oversimplification. You can enjoy the experience of playing a game, but to say that they are merely pleasurable really doesn't cover the gamma of emotional responses that the vast array of these games stimulate. Not just pleasure and empty thrills, but sadness, anger, fear. One who hasn't been left with a hole in their heart from playing a game hasn't played enough games. There are numerous examples of people getting lost in game worlds. Online games such as RuneScape, Second Life, Minecraft, World of Warcraft, to name but a few, appear to bridge the gap between balance and the imaginary, with the social aspect of interacting with real people. The presumable goal of a completely artificial world in the machine would be one where its non-player inhabitants would be indistinguishable. In William Gibson's Neuromancer, cyberspace is a place where humans can jack into biomechanically and navigate a digital landscape. The book's protagonist, a hacker known as Case, who, quote, lived for the bodiness exaltation of cyberspace until he is punished for stealing from his employers.
They damaged his nervous system with a wartime Russian mycotoxin. Strapped to a bed in a Memphis hotel, his talent burning out micron by micron, he hallucinated for 30 hours. The damage was minute, subtle, and utterly effective. For Case, who lived for the bodiless exaltation of cyberspace, it was the fall. In the bars he'd frequented as a cowboy hotshot, the elite stance involved a certain relaxed contempt for the flesh. The body was meat. Case fell into the prison of his own flesh.
Cyberspace is where Case felt most alive, but having his connection to it severed, he's forced to live out his life in the grim reality he finds himself in. Similar tech has of course been depicted in other media: Ready Player One, Batman Beyond, Cyberpunk 2077, Star Trek, and perhaps symbolizing this concept most iconically, the pill choice in The Matrix, all showcasing attachments to the artificial at the expense of the genuine.
No! Please, put me back in. It hurts out here, please!
And it seems with every passing year, we get more complex virtual worlds and more advanced ways to experience them, as well as big tech pouring billions into making a version of this become a thing. At some point, I think it becomes only logical to wonder about the hypothetical. Now, I'm not a philosopher or an intellectual. If I'm being honest, I barely know the months of the year in order. So to take this down to my level, I'm sure you will have occasionally seen those memes that pop up on the internet when scrolling online. They're due by the algorithm, designed to spark wars in the comments. Gems like, would you rather be a millionaire with all your time free, or a billionaire who has to work 40 hours a week, win the lottery or have a successful business? Get 2 million now or 100 every day for the rest of your life, you get the idea. These hypotheticals always kind of bug me, because, well, they're hardly terrible choices either way. You're picking from two pretty good options, it's not much of a conundrum. But with media that depicts this kind of tech, often presents a stark contrast that gives it its allure. The world is commonly portrayed as being in despair, apocalyptic, nightmarish, or otherwise just undesirable. A common theme seems to be that you're someone in this virtual world. You're nothing out there, and will never be anything more than that. I think it's this context that's pretty vital to the answer you would give to this question. Things in this virtual world don't need to be perfect for people to consider it. They just need to be better, to provide a tangible manifestation to the hopes and dreams one might have. To go back to the Matrix, it's this thinking that erodes Cypher's spirit, to the point where he accepts living a life of luxury in the reality he's accepted as home for most of his life, and it being preferable to fighting an endless war against an army of advanced machines in the real world.
Do we have a deal, Mr. Reed?
You know, I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
But the starting concept of the Matrix is also opposite of that of the experience machine model, in that you are already in the machine. It's already your perceived reality. It is the home you are leaving, as opposed to being where you are leaving home for. This was touched upon in 2014, when Joshua Green proposed that the status quo bias could affect the experience machine concept, saying that should it be recontextualized, it would seem more tolerable. Green argues that should you wake up one day in the distant future and realize that your life until now has already been in the machine for 40 years, and that this was your annual 10-year checkup, how many people would opt to leave into the unknown, rather than return to their life, family, and existence with no knowledge or memory of this interruption ever happening? In 2010, a similar idea was put forward by Philippe de Brigard, who went a step further and surveyed university graduates, giving them the experience machine conundrum. He told the participants to imagine that they've awakened outside the tank and realized that their life up until now hadn't been real. 54% opted to return to reality, with 46% staying in the machine. However, some of them were told that their real life was as a prisoner in a maximum security facility. 87% preferred the machine in this case. Others were told that their real life was as a multi-millionaire living in Monaco. This pushed the results to 50-50. But others were told that their life was completely different but weren't told any specifics. This resulted in 59% of them choosing to stay in the machine. In video games, or any other media for that matter, the person we follow is the protagonist. You are the guy who the universe revolves around. When you hop into a story, things happen exclusively around you, and you experience the most interesting, exciting, profound time in that person's life. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end, in contrast to a reality that can be just another person trying to get by. In the 1930s, American psychologist E.F. Skinner devised an experiment whereby rats would be placed into a box with a lever for food or water, and another which would give them an electric shock. Unsurprisingly, they chose the former and avoided the latter, but this was expanded upon in the 50s by psychologists James Olds and Peter Milner. The experiment was modified. Now, a lever which would deliver a stimulation directly to the brain of the rats, directly activating their reward center. These rats would end up pressing the lever thousands of times an hour, forgoing food, water, copulation, and even their own young. The only way to stop this behavior was to unplug their connection. One of the reasons rats are generally tested on is because of their relative similarity to humans anatomically and physiologically, and these rats didn't really seem to get enough of it. It's not completely unrealistic to imagine a potential future where humans are, quite literally, hooked on tech. Some of the more pessimistic would say we're already there, and in some aspects this may be partially true. Imagine if I could calculate all the time you've ever spent on a mobile phone game or app, and then asked you if you could rather spend that 100 hours reading the greatest literature humans have ever written, or matching up virtual fruit into a line. And this isn't meant as a judgment at anybody. I'm almost level 40 in Pokemon Go, but rather it's just kind of not the way our brains work for the most part. And it's an example of how these A or B questions don't quite represent the human experience, while also being an alarming look at how this could be implemented. With diodes hooked to the pleasure parts of our brain, if we could just program experiences, curate our lives, download Kung Fu, would we as humans activate that lever? 2015 survival horror game SOMA sees you awaken as Simon Jarrett after a traumatic brain injury, except it's 100 years after your death. It turns out Simon's brain was scanned, and a copy of his consciousness found its way onto Pathos 2, an underwater research facility in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, the station's proximity allowing it to survive the comet which struck Earth and wiped out all life during that time. The planet is now an empty husk. Simon is thrust into the scenario as if he just woke up, like it was the same day. His mind is in the body of a deceased woman being puppeted by a chip containing him. At some point in the game, he needs to transfer his consciousness into another body, and after doing so, comes to the horrifying realization that his previous body is still talking. His consciousness wasn't so much transferred as copy and pasted, just like it had been all those decades ago. The plan is to escape the planet on the Ark, an artificial reality device designed to house the digital consciousnesses of many humans before being fired into space as a satellite. The creator of the Ark project, Catherine Chun, speaks to Simon in the form of a digital consciousness and recounts beautiful memories, visualizing the world she used to know in vivid detail.
When I was little, I used to climb the stairs all the way to the top of the building. And I can still feel how I had to, tuck my arm so I could push the heavy steel door open. Well, the first time that I dared go up there, I stepped out onto the roof and watched the smog rise and fall over Taipei. I got all the way up to the corner ledge and, I felt the warm wind in my hair and the sun was setting and the streets below were shadowed by the tall buildings. Street food vendors filled the air with aromas of all my favorite foods. For a brief moment, I felt connected to the world in a way that I never had before.
This is where Simon comes in, and his goal to escape Pathos 2 can only really end in one way: to copy his consciousness onto the Ark and live forever among the stars, which he manages to achieve. But being copied means this version of him gets left behind on Earth. In this story, the machine in question is salvation, a literal heaven, sanctuary from the abyss of the horrors below. You're just left with the dread of being a human who isn't human, a copy of someone who existed a century ago. Are you the real essence of a person, distilled and digested, or do you become something else? When you finally get to see life on the artificial world, the last of humanity, digitized brains in a simulated world, how do we know if their emotions aren't also artificial? Or rather, how can they not be? Does it even matter? There is part of this conversation where we struggle between whether we are merely organic machines or creatures with an undefinable soul. And in either scenario, is perception not reality? At the end of Inception, does it even matter if Cobb's spinning totem falls? Does he care? Alongside the question of if something artificial can bring you true, real happiness, there is the whole minefield of what your life would be like if you could just have what you want all the time. If you could just zap inconveniences away. If you didn't have to wrestle with your mattress putting the bedsheet on. That's one I really hate. The consensus seems to be that if you could just have what you wanted all the time, life would become somewhat pointless. Would this reality of people being too content really be less preferable than having a sizable portion of our world living in pain and misery? There seems to be this mindset that conflict, difficulty, hardship, and even pain is what brings people to their potential. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The one who falls and gets up is stronger than the one who never tried. Or any number of other Tumblr-worthy quotes. But what I think these sentiments don't account for is that across all the collective people who have ever existed in our world, there are lots of people who fall and get back up. Some simply do this until they can't anymore. It's less of an issue that people simply don't suffer or try enough, more that the system we live in, there are finite spaces for such lives and positions, and the roads to them don't necessarily correlate with what we have control over. And, side note, on the subject, what doesn't kill you definitely does not make you stronger by default, like a wasting disease, or getting hit in the head with a brick. Anyway, there seems to be this belief that some people have that misfortune, hardship, or tragedy is a kind of karmic down payment for eventual success. And to be clear, I can understand why. It's optimistic. It's just hang in there with the cat on the tree. But the harsh fact is, sometimes bad stuff happens, and that's it. It brings people comfort to believe that there is this cosmic balance, this energy where everything levels out. Those rags to riches stories where someone who was previously homeless works their way up to becoming a millionaire get lots of publicity, and rightly so. But there are an inconceivable number of people across human history for which this hasn't been the case. The very allure is built on that this is the exception. For every great success story, we can't comprehend the amount of people who this hasn't been the case for. I think about this a lot. What if I told you that if you picked to go back to the real world, you would live out the rest of your days attempting to do whatever it is you wanted to do? Start a business, better yourself, achieve more, only for none of it to work out, leading you to living out an unremarkable, unsatisfying what could have been of a life. In some ways, social media can be viewed as our current day's own virtual reality space. People get lost in it, addicted to it, as the same way they do in other cyberpunk stories. And the question persists, are the contents real or not, and to what extent? Generally speaking, things in our current actual reality are more accessible than they've ever been. We're living in the most technologically advanced age. Oftentimes it feels like the world can be our oyster, but also feels like it consistently isn't. There is an element of the digital grass being greener in this imaginary life where everything is as perfect as can be. The worst and most human part of this is that sometimes I do look at people who I don't particularly respect, who have had careers I don't consider to be good or even morally right. And I think to myself, if I really had the chance, this A or B binary choice, could I honestly tell myself I would turn this life down if offered to me on a plate? If I thought that was my alternative to an unfulfilled life? Just wipe away all memory of this decision and crawl into someone else's reality? I think a lot of people will be tempted by such a chance, and I don't think I could blame them. Whatever form this device may come in, experience machine, virtual reality, brain dance, the matrix, cyberspace, it is something the very idea of highlights the inequities of the world it would exist in, the highest functioning placebo that can never be administered, a lie so white it blinds us to anything else. I'm sorry if you were actually expecting me to answer the main question this video asks. I don't have one. Depending on where you stand on the issue of determinism, if you're someone who thinks that if you just work hard enough and believe in something and never give up, it will happen, or if you think that things aren't really that cut and dry, and life is a series of randomized events with invariable pockets of opportunity. People have, do, and will continue to argue about just how much free will we have. Nature versus nurture, luck versus skill, all of that stuff. Truthfully, I'm not sure which answer is harder to swallow. The idea that we have next to no agency in all of this, or that I'm just not good enough to achieve it. Humans have long had grandiose imaginings of worlds and realities beyond their own. This ultimate peak of existence, where everything just feels right. Be they in the form of folktales, novels, plays, paintings, afterlives. There's a reason this stuff is called escapism. It is in our nature to crave reward, whether it's lining up colours in Candy Crush, or guessing what we've long deserved in an afterlife. When the rewards seem increasingly unlikely, we tend to seek other places for them. The idea of the existence of a modern experience machine, a virtual existence to house your consciousness and give you all you desire, seems not only simultaneously heavenly and hellish, but increasingly less implausible with every year that passes. Even if it were to be considered a form of digital hell, I think many of its inhabitants would enter it willingly. So I guess this is the part of the video where I ask you to like and subscribe if you liked the video. Well, you know what, even if you didn't like it, if you could still like and subscribe, that would be great. On the subject of this video, I do occasionally shift between being in somewhat disbelief that this channel has 1,600 subscribers and 100,000 total video views, and on the other hand, feeling this primal fear that the channel isn't getting views and will one day just die. So it really does help to get those positive affirmations of subscribers and people seemingly really caring about what I have to say. So thank you if you're still watching. Does anyone even watch the videos this far? I'm probably just talking to myself right now.